and let's go ahead and get started. So my agenda for today, I'm going to start with a presentation, just give kind of an overview of at least what I'm seeing in the 2025 permit, talk about some key dates, some key changes that I've noticed. And then I really kind of want to open it up to some more peer-to-peer discussion. One goal I want to get out of this is have questions and comments that I can pass on anonymously to Ecology. We've talked about hosting Shannon, the industrial permit writer, in the new year. She's talked about maybe hosting some webinars or workshops or that type of thing. I think if we can get her a list of concerns or comments or questions that we have about this permit, I think that can kind of tailor her content for future discussions and can help everybody out. Also want to say, this permit's been out for about a week and a half now. I'm sure there's plenty that I've missed. I'm sure there's plenty that I've misread. Chime in to tell me I'm wrong. I appreciate it. I'm sure it's a learning experience for all of us. So, and we can handle those things kind of in more of a discussion manner. So, with that being said, here's some key dates for you to kind of keep your eye on for this new permit. The first one is December 2nd. This was the date that the permit was issued. That was last Monday. This is a very important date because the date of issuance starts a permit appeals window. You have 30 days from the day that that's issued to appeal the permit. So if you're going down kind of that process, that comes up pretty quick. So that deadline, if my math is correct, is going to be around January 1st. Also, January 1st is the effective date of this permit. So we're still under the 2020 permit that's been in effect for the last 5 years. That changes on January 1st. Another important date is, you need to know that not necessarily everything has to be implemented right on January 1st. You have until May 15th to have your SWIP updated. That was extended a little bit thanks to some public comment. So May 15th is that date. And that's also the date that your annual report is due. So big day in the stormwater world there. July 1st is kind of the last date I want to highlight. That's the date that those SWIP updates need to be implemented and become a reality on your site. So let's dive into some of the key changes here. And before I get too deep into that, I just want to acknowledge that there's potential for some confusion here because there are really 3 permits that we're talking about. We have the current permit, the 2020 permit that's been in effect the last 5 years or so. We're still under that permit right now. But over the last few months, we've been talking, and really the last year, we've been talking a lot about this draft permit and all those changes that were proposed in that permit. There were all the public comments that came in through that draft permit. But now we're on to the kind of the 2025 permit. I'm kind of referring to that as the new permit. For clarification, for the most part, I'm going to ignore this draft permit and really just compare the new permit to our current permit. I might even call that the old permit from time to time. With that being said, we will mention the draft a little bit. And one kind of major thing that was proposed in the draft that didn't make it into this permit was this classification of transportation facilities who might need permit coverage. So proposed in the draft was transportation facilities who had material handling and storage. That was potentially going to bring in several hundred new permittees. That did not make its way into the permit. And Ecology is kind of not really expecting a whole lot in terms of new permittees coming in. It's just expanded coverage, more things for the current permittees to do. So here's kind of what this looks like in the permit. It's the same as the current permit as in the new permit. It's that vehicle maintenance activity, equipment cleaning operations, or airplane de-icing. Again, that's just for the transportation facilities. What did change was the definition of industrial area. And they just added a little bit of language here that's important really just to one group. And that's just kind of this clarification that ecology intends for cargo handling activities to be included in that footprint of industrial area. They also did a little bit of clarifying, talking about office buildings and those accompanying parking lots not really being the area of industrial activity. And this is important for some of these large transportation facilities. There's been a little bit of debate on how this should be interpreted. I don't want to really go too deep into that debate, but um, certain facilities were interpreting that as only the vehicle maintenance areas that needed coverage. That would be representative of kind of this red footprint here. With this new definition and some legal cases, that's likely going to expand the footprint for these facilities pretty significantly. So you can see kind of the difference between the red highlighted area and the green highlighted area. So here's what that looks like in the permit. Really, this highlighted portion at the bottom is what's new. Again, kind of that first sentence there is saying that the office buildings and parking lots are excluded from the area of industrial activity as long as that drainage is not mixed with stormwater drain from industrial activity. And then it also is clarifying that the term includes areas that at intermodal transportation facilities where material handling occurs. So my sense is the people who this most apply to are pretty familiar with this debate here. So we'll continue on. There's a couple of new sampling requirements. Important to know that these sampling requirements are for only certain industries. The first one being 6 ppd quinone, 6 ppd Q. This is the tire-derived chemical that's been kind of recently discovered that's extremely toxic to aquatic life, especially coho salmon. This sampling requirement is going to be for facilities with a waste management NAICS code and a transportation NAICS code. Important to know, if you've been following along with this 6 ppd saga, it is pretty new. There's not very many labs that are currently accredited to take samples from this. I think that whole analysis process is just kind of being figured out. So that sampling requirement doesn't start for 2028 as a way to kind of allow those labs to catch up to hopefully lower the price of analysis a little bit. Other notes on the 6 ppd Q here, that's report only, meaning that it's really just data collection for ecology. You're not subject to benchmark exceedances, corrective action for your 6 ppd samples. Also of note that small businesses, this is businesses with 50 or fewer employees, only have to sample for 6 ppd annually. Continuing on, one other sampling requirement here is PFAS. This has been in the news quite a bit. It's kind of these, they call them the forever chemicals. It's a big group of chemicals that are extremely persistent in the environment. This sampling requirement is for only the waste management and certain air transportation facilities. The air transportation facilities who use this aqueous film forming foam down here on the bottom right that have historical or current use of this foam will have to sample for PFAS. Again, this PFAS is report only. So just like the 6 ppd Q, it's the benchmark exceedances and corrective actions don't really apply. However, this is kind of the first time that a parameter includes sampling for discharges to ground. So if you're in one of these NAICS codes, you're now going to have to sample discharges to ground. So interesting precedent there. Continuing on talking about discharges of ground, there's a lot of new language on the discharges of ground. I encourage you to go through and read it. One thing that came up in some of our discussions and some of the workshops that Ecology held was the proposed language, at least in the draft, was a little confusing on whether or not facilities who discharged to ground and had these groundwater sampling requirements now needed permit coverage, say if 100% of their water discharged. So there was some clarifying language in the final permit saying that no, it's only those who are otherwise required to obtain permit coverage. I know that's not very clear. I'll show you what the permit looks like here in a second. They've also added some additional potential for discharges to ground to be sampled. Basically, if ecology deems that your discharge to ground is the functional equivalent to surface water, that you'll also have to sample that discharge. And then there are some additional language about following the stormwater management manuals for groundwater discharge. So here's what all that looks like. Again, I'm not going to read every line of this. I encourage you to go through and catch up on the discharge to ground language. I do want to point out a couple of things here. So again, clarifying that the terms and conditions of this permit apply to sites with a discharge point to groundwater that are otherwise required to obtain coverage under this general permit. So it's only those who were otherwise required to obtain coverage that need to do these provisions when it comes to discharges to ground. Continuing on, it's talking about sampling. It says permittees are not required to sample on-site discharges to ground unless you have to sample for PFAS, or it's specifically required by ecology, or a discharge point to groundwater is deemed by ecology to constitute a functional equivalent to a point source discharge to surface water. So some interesting new language when it comes to discharges to ground there. They've also defined what a groundwater discharge point or discharge to ground means. So it means the location where stormwater associated with industrial activity enters a stormwater infiltration source that's used, intended, or designed to infiltrate water into the ground. So another big change here is revolving around training and training around your stormwater pollution prevention plan. And that's now that all these facilities are going to need to train contractors and vendors that come on their site. And this is contractors and vendors who have potential to impact water quality and have duties in the industrial area. So that can be a potentially big lift depending on kind of how many people coming in and out of your site that meet these criteria. So know that is coming and in this permit. One note here is that can be kind of eliminated if you are supervising these individuals at all time. Again, the person supervising needs to be trained on your trained staff on your slip. So important to know there. Continuing on, we have some training timelines that have been added to this permit. Your employees, as well as those vendors and contractors, need to be trained within 90 days of the hire date. Again, that's for permanent employees, and part-time, temporary, seasonal employees need to be hired within 30 days from your hiring date. And of course, this needs to be logged and kept with your slip. I've had some people reach out to me saying, hey, this timeline could be problematic, especially when you're considering those vendors and contractors. And I think it's a good idea to be clear of when the hiring date is. There's potential that, if you sign a contract with a vendor, but they're not doing work in 3 months, you need to make sure that hire date is when they're stepping foot on your site, not when you signed that contract 3 months ago. I think just some paperwork to take care of there. Continuing on, there was some, clarification in kind of how ecology is running these benchmark exceedances. This came up during some of the workshops with Jeff, and during kind of the public comment period, was this confusion on kind of how benchmark exceedances were tallied and how corrective actions needed to be implemented on your site. So my understanding of this is that kind of the new language here is highlighted here at the bottom, is that those benchmark exceedances are tallied facility-wide, and that when you go into corrective action, so that corrective action needs to be applied to all areas that exceeded that benchmark in a calendar year. So, quick example, let's say you have 4 discharge points, numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have a benchmark exceedance in quarter 1 at discharge point 1, that's a level 1 corrective action. If you, the next quarter, have a discharge point that exceeds, say, at discharge point 4, you're now in level 2. It's calculated facility wide. And that level 2 corrective action applies for both discharge point 1 and for where those exceedances occurred that year. I'm sure that's clear as mud, but hopefully that helps. Important to kind of understand how this benchmark exceedance is being interpreted. There's been some deadline changes around corrective actions. This one was interesting to me, and the level 3 engineering report, they gave you a little bit more time on that. It's now due June 30th, which was previously May 15th. I think that May 15th date was the day that Ecology was getting all their annual reports and other paperwork. They weren't really able to look at those anyway, so they went ahead and extended that. One note here, again, talking about the draft, there was a proposal in the draft talking about extending that level 3 deadline for facilities that need an engineering report, basically giving an extra year. I don't think that made it into the final permit, and it looks to me that that's going to continue to need a modification of coverage. Continuing on, there's been some new language around dumpsters. And one of those is an added definition of kind of what a dumpster is. Some of that new language includes that the dumpsters need to be either undercover or fitted with a storm-resistant lid. There's also some talk about doing annual inspections of your dumpsters to make sure there's not leaks and pinholes and that type of thing. But I really want to get into this definition. So this definition was added. Dumpster means a solid waste or recyclable material container that meets the requirements for reusable containers or detachable containers under the Washington Administrative Code. And then here's a screenshot of what that WAC says. Reusable containers are rigid and durable, corrosion resistant, non-absorbent and watertight, rodent-proof and easily cleanable, equipped with a closed-fitting cover, suitable for handling with no sharp edges or other hazardous conditions, and equal to or less than 32 gallons in volume where manual handling is practiced. And then the detachable container definition must be durable, corrosion resistant, non-absorbent, non-leaking, and have either a solid cover or screen cover to prevent littering. So again, if you have these solid waste or recyclable containers that meet those requirements, know that there's some additional best management practices that you need to conduct on those dumpsters. Continuing on, there's just an added line on tire storage saying that if you have tires stored at your facility, those need to be undercover or in a storm-resistant shelter. So make sure that gets done if you have tires stored. Some slight changes here to the conditional no exposure process. Previously, if you were going for a conditional no exposure, that's for facilities who basically all of their activity is inside undercover. Previously, that was automatically granted after 90 days. That's no longer going to be the case. Ecology is going to write you yes or no saying whether or not you get that C&E. A slight change from the draft permit is Ecology did give themselves a 90-day timeline to do that. There was a lot of concern about kind of how long that could take because Ecology has indicated that they want to send out an inspector to look at these sites before they make a decision. And whether or not that's going to happen in all cases, I don't know. That's not in the permit, but that's kind of what they've indicated. Also, a part of this is a sampling point waiver. This is a process that you need to go through if you have basically a sampling point that you can't feasibly sample due to safety, access issues, that type of thing. Um, this process is a modification of permit coverage, so it takes at least 60 days to complete. And that language in there says that you need that all those requirements of the permit remain into effect. So here's what that process looks like. I don't want to go too far into it, but know that it's there if you have a difficult to sample area. Continuing on with sampling, if you are sampling your pH with pH strips, you can no longer do that. You need a pH meter, pH pen. So just know the pH strips are out. There's been some changes to some marine effluent limits. I'm going to go through this pretty quick, but basically, if you're a site that discharges to a marine water body with a numeric effluent limit, know that a lot of those values have changed. They've gone from many site-specific calculations that are now numeric values. I think copper, lead, PCP. I think there's a few more that fall into that category. Continuing on, there's some SWIP additions, some new things you need to have in that stormwater pollution prevention plan. One of those is around your site maps. Your site map needs to now outline vehicle storage areas, equipment cleaning areas, areas of industrial activity, and groundwater discharge points on top of everything else that's already in your site maps. There's some additional record keeping that you need to be aware of. Again, this reporting and record keeping is so critical to your permit, and they don't seem like big changes, but they can be if you miss them. B&P maintenance logs are new. Adding those vendors and contractors to your training logs is new. There's also some additional sampling documentation that they want you to keep. One of those is the chain of custody form. The other one is a sampling case narrative. When that was in the draft permit, I had no idea I think they called it a sampling narrative. My question is, what the heck was a sampling narrative? They did define that in the final permit. It's basically kind of the notes section of your lab report. It says the narrative provided in the lab report describing condition of the samples upon receipt, how they were stored in the laboratory, any issues with analysis, and related quality assurance, quality control issues that may affect data integrity, usability as applicable. So just make sure you're going through this permit, making note of these seemingly minor changes that need to happen with your reporting, record keeping, SWIP updates, and that type of thing. So with that, I really want to open the room, hear from other people. I'm sure there's plenty I missed. I'm sure there's questions.